The wooden gavel felt heavy in Admiral Kim Tae-ho's weathered hands as he sat behind the makeshift tribunal table in the bombed-out courthouse of Seoul. Outside, the distant rumble of artillery reminded everyone that the war was far from over. The year 1951 had brought nothing but death, destruction, and difficult decisions to the Korean peninsula. The woman standing before him looked pitiful. Lee So-min appeared to be in her early 30s, but the war had aged her face beyond her years. Her black hair was dirty and tangled, falling across her shoulders like a curtain of despair. The simple grey dress she wore was torn in several places, patched with different coloured fabric that spoke of desperate times. Her shoes were worn through at the soles, held together with strips of cloth. She kept her eyes downcast, occasionally glancing up with nervous, darting movements. When she spoke, her English came out in broken fragments mixed with Korean words that the American observers could not understand. Her hands shook slightly as she gripped a small, tattered bag that contained what appeared to be her only possessions. To Admiral Kim Tae-ho, she looked like thousands of other refugees who had fled south during the brutal fighting, women who had lost everything, who wandered from camp to camp seeking food and shelter. The kind of person who might do anything to survive, even betray her own country. The charges against her were serious. Military intelligence claimed she had been passing information to North Korean agents. They said she had been seen meeting with suspicious individuals near the refugee camps. Radio intercepts had mentioned someone matching her description. The evidence seemed clear enough for wartime justice. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, the American liaison officer, sat at the side table reviewing his notes. His crisp uniform contrasted sharply with the shabby surroundings. He had made his opinion clear to Kim Tae-ho before the hearing began. These cases needed to be handled quickly and decisively. The war effort could not afford to have spies operating freely among the refugee population. Captain Park Jun-sik, Kim Tae-ho's aide, whispered updates about the case. Intelligence reports suggested So-min had been moving between different camps with unusual frequency. She seemed to have access to information about supply convoys and troop movements that ordinary refugees should not possess. Her ability to speak multiple languages made her even more suspicious. The other UN observers shifted impatiently in their seats. Colonel Thompson from the British forces kept checking his watch. Major Dubois from the French battalion appeared to be half asleep. They all had more pressing matters to attend to than what seemed like an obvious case of wartime espionage. Kim Tae-ho felt the weight of their expectations. The Allied command had made it clear that South Korean military courts needed to demonstrate they could handle security threats effectively. Too much leniency might suggest weakness or incompetence. Too much delay might allow other spies to escape or cause more damage. The interpreter, Corporal Choi Min-ho, struggled to make sense of So-min's fragmented responses to the preliminary questions. She claimed to be from a village near the 38th, parallel that had been destroyed early in the war. She said she had been moving south ever since, trying to find relatives who might still be alive. When asked about the suspicious meetings, So-min became agitated. She spoke rapidly in Korean, gesturing with her hands, but the interpreter could only catch fragments about helping people and finding supplies. Her explanations sounded confused and contradictory. Admiral Kim Tae-ho studied her carefully. Something about her manner seemed odd, but he could not identify exactly what bothered him. Despite her ragged appearance, there was something in her posture that did not quite fit the image of a desperate refugee. When she thought no one was looking, her eyes seemed sharper and more calculating than her humble demeanor suggested. The prosecution presented their evidence methodically. Photographs showed So-min near restricted areas. Witness statements described her asking detailed questions about military movements. Communication intercepts mentioned coded references that seemed to match her activities. Defense was minimal. The court-appointed attorney, Lieutenant Lee Dong-min, could only argue that the evidence was circumstantial. He pointed out that many refugees asked questions about military activities because they wanted to know if areas were safe for travel. The photographs proved presence but not criminal intent. As the morning wore on, Kim Tae-ho found himself leaning toward conviction. The pressure from the Allied observers was subtle but constant. The war situation demanded quick action against potential threats. Reasonable doubt seemed like a luxury they could not afford. The case appeared straightforward. A refugee woman, desperate and vulnerable, had been compromised by enemy agents. Perhaps they had threatened her or offered her food and safety in exchange for information. It was a common story in wartime. People did what they had to do to survive. Kim Tae-ho prepared to render his verdict. The sentence would likely be severe, possibly execution. The woman continued to stand silently, her fate hanging in the balance of a war that had already claimed so many lives. He raised his gavel, ready to bring this matter to its expected conclusion. 6 months earlier, the autumn air in Busan carried the smell of smoke and desperation. The port city had become a massive refugee center, overflowing with people who had fled the advancing North Korean forces. Among the chaos of makeshift camps and crowded shelters, Lee So-min moved with quiet efficiency that few people noticed. She had arrived in Busan like thousands of others, carrying only a small bag and wearing clothes that had seen better days. But unlike most refugees who sat waiting for help, So-min immediately began working. She spoke to people in Korean, English, Japanese, and even some Chinese. Her ability to communicate with everyone made her incredibly useful. The first camp director, Mr. Kim Sung-ho, had been struggling to organize the daily distribution of rice and medical supplies. Too many people spoke different dialects, and some refugees were actually Chinese or Japanese civilians caught in the war zone. Communication was nearly impossible until So-min quietly stepped forward to help translate. Within days, she had created a simple system. She would walk through the camps each morning, talking to families about their needs. She wrote everything down in a small notebook, using different languages, depending on what people understood best. By afternoon, she would present organized lists to the camp administrators, showing exactly what supplies were needed and where. Her work expanded quickly. So-min began coordinating between different camps, helping to move supplies from areas that had extra resources to places that desperately needed help. She seemed to understand logistics in a way that impressed even the military officers, who occasionally visited the camps. Major Williams, an American supply officer, first noticed her during a routine inspection. He watched, as So-min directed, the unloading of medical supplies from a truck, ensuring that antibiotics went to camps with sick children while bandages were distributed to areas treating wounded soldiers. Her organization was better than some military operations he had seen, but her efficiency also attracted unwanted attention. Intelligence officers began asking questions about the woman who seemed to know so much about supply movements and camp populations. How did a simple refugee understand complex logistics? Why did she have detailed knowledge about which camps received certain types of aid? Sergeant Martinez from military intelligence started following her activities. He noticed that So-min often met with truck drivers, dock workers, and camp administrators. These meetings looked suspicious to someone trained to spot espionage. She would talk quietly with these men, sometimes exchanging pieces of paper, sometimes just having brief conversations before moving on. The surveillance reports began piling up. So-min was observed near the main supply depot on multiple occasions. She was seen talking to Korean workers who had access to military shipping schedules. She appeared to know when supply convoys would arrive before official announcements were made. What the intelligence officers did not understand was that So-min had created an informal network of communication that helped the entire refugee system work more effectively. The truck drivers told her when deliveries would be delayed so she could warn camp administrators. The dock workers shared information about which ships were bringing medical supplies versus food, allowing her to prepare camps for what they would receive. Her notebook became filled with detailed information that would have been valuable to enemy forces. She recorded which camps had the most people, what types of supplies were being moved, and when military convoys traveled certain routes. To military intelligence, this looked like the perfect spy operation. The breakthrough came when radio operators intercepted communications between North Korean agents. The messages mentioned a woman working in the refugee camps who had access to detailed information about UN supply operations. The description matched So-min perfectly. She was Korean, spoke multiple languages, and had unusual knowledge about military logistics. Captain Johnson from Intelligence briefed his superiors about the suspected spy ring. The evidence seemed clear. A North Korean agent had infiltrated the refugee population and was gathering intelligence about UN operations. The woman's humble appearance was obviously a cover for her real mission. Additional surveillance confirmed their suspicions. So-min continued meeting with various individuals who had access to sensitive information. She maintained detailed records about supply movements and camp populations. Her activities followed patterns that intelligence officers recognized as classic espionage behavior. The decision to arrest her was made during a morning briefing in November. Colonel Peterson reviewed the evidence and determined that So-min represented a significant security threat. Her access to information about refugee operations could compromise the safety of thousands of people and potentially impact military planning. Military police received orders to apprehend Lee So-min. Quietly, they found her at Camp Number 7, helping to organize the distribution of winter clothing that had just arrived from American relief organizations. She was speaking with an elderly woman in Japanese, explaining how to register for additional blankets when the soldiers approached. So-min did not resist arrest. She simply asked if she could finish helping the elderly woman first. The soldiers allowed her a few minutes to complete the conversation before placing her in custody. As they led her away, refugees throughout the camp watched in confusion. Many of them had been helped by So-min over the past months and could not understand why she was being arrested. The evidence against her was circumstantial but compelling in wartime conditions. Her activities looked suspicious when viewed through the lens of military intelligence, even though her actual purpose had been humanitarian. In a war zone, the line between helping people and gathering intelligence could be dangerously thin. Admiral Kim Tae-ho lifted his gavel, ready to deliver what everyone expected would be a harsh sentence. The evidence seemed clear. The war demanded swift justice, and the Allied observers waited for him to demonstrate Korean military authority. The courtroom fell silent, except for the distant sound of artillery that never seemed to stop. Lee So-min, he began in a firm voice, you have been found guilty of espionage and aiding enemy forces during wartime. The penalty for such crimes is, Honorable Admiral, So-min interrupted softly, raising her hand slightly. Her voice was clearer now, less broken than it had been during the questioning. May I please speak before you finish? Kim Tae-ho paused, surprised by the interruption. The woman's tone had changed completely. Gone was the nervous, fragmented speech of a frightened refugee. Instead, she spoke with quiet confidence that seemed out of place with her ragged appearance. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison frowned and whispered something to his aide. This was not how these proceedings usually went. Convicted spies did not typically request final statements, especially not in such a composed manner. You may speak briefly, Kim Tae-ho replied, though he was unsure why. He was allowing this deviation from standard procedure. So-min reached into her small tattered bag. The guards tensed, hands moving toward their weapons, but she moved slowly and deliberately. Instead of producing anything dangerous, she pulled out what appeared to be a carefully folded piece of cloth. She unwrapped the cloth with gentle movements, revealing several documents that had been protected from the dirt and moisture that had stained everything else she carried. The papers looked official, with formal seals and stamps that caught the light streaming through the broken windows. These documents will explain who I really am, So-min said, her voice growing stronger with each word. She no longer kept her eyes downcast, but looked directly at Admiral Kim Tae-ho. My real name is Lee So-min, but not Lee So-min the refugee. She held up the first document. Even from a distance, Kim Tae-ho could see it was some type of corporate identification with official letterhead and a photograph that clearly showed the woman standing before them, though in much better circumstances. I am the daughter of Lee Byung-ho, she continued, and several people in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. Even through the chaos of war, that name was known throughout Korea. Lee Byung-ho was one of the country's most successful industrialists, a man whose factories had been crucial to Korea's economic development before the war. Captain Park Jun-sik leaned forward, studying the documents more carefully. The seals appeared genuine, and the photograph was definitely the same woman, though she looked completely different in business attire with her hair properly styled. More importantly, So-min said, producing another document, I am the operations director of Daehan Manufacturing Corporation. We are one of Korea's largest industrial companies, and we have been secretly working with UN forces throughout this war. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison stood up abruptly. That's impossible. We would know about any major Korean corporations involved in military supply operations. So-min smiled slightly, the first time she had shown any emotion other than fear or nervousness. The operations have been classified at the highest levels, Colonel. My company has been producing critical materials for UN forces under contracts that were kept secret to protect our facilities from enemy targeting. She unfolded a third document, this one bearing official UN command seals and signatures. Admiral Kim Tae-ho recognized some of the names at the bottom of the page, including senior American and British officers he had worked with personally. For the past 8 months, Daehan Manufacturing has been supplying specialized steel components, electronic parts and precision machinery to UN forces, So-min explained. My role has been to personally oversee these operations while maintaining complete secrecy about our involvement. The courtroom erupted in whispered conversations. Colonel Thompson, who had appeared bored earlier, was now studying So-min with intense interest. Major Dubois had awakened completely and was taking notes. The refugee camps were the perfect cover, So-min continued. I could move freely throughout the area, coordinating supply chains and ensuring that our materials reached the right military units without attracting enemy attention. My knowledge of logistics came from years of managing corporate operations, not from espionage training. Captain Park approached the tribunal table and examined the documents more closely. He whispered urgently to Admiral Kim Tae-ho, pointing out specific details on the papers that confirmed their authenticity. The suspicious meetings that intelligence officers observed were actually coordination sessions with our delivery teams, So-min explained. The detailed information I possessed about supply movements was necessary for me to ensure our contributions reached their intended destinations safely. She produced one final document, this one showing financial records of massive material, contributions to the UN war effort. The numbers were staggering, representing millions of dollars worth of critical supplies that had been donated secretly by her company. My appearance as a refugee was deliberate camouflage, she said. If North Korean forces had discovered that Lee Byung-ho's daughter was coordinating military supply operations, they would have targeted our facilities and eliminated a crucial source of support for UN forces. Admiral Kim Tae-ho stared at the document spread before him, his mind reeling from this complete reversal of everything he had believed about the case. The woman he had been about to sentence as a traitor was actually one of Korea's most valuable contributors to the war effort. The silence in the courtroom stretched for what felt like hours as Admiral Kim Tae-ho examined the documents spread across his desk. Each paper told a different part of an incredible story that completely changed everything he thought he knew about the woman standing before him. So-min waited patiently while the military officers whispered among themselves and studied the evidence she had provided. Her posture had changed completely now that her real identity was revealed. She stood straighter, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to making important decisions and managing complex operations. Explain to me exactly how this operation worked, Admiral Kim Tae-ho said finally, his voice carefully controlled. I need to understand why you chose such an elaborate disguise. So-min nodded and began speaking in clear, professional tones that were completely different from the broken English she had used earlier. When the war began, my father and I knew that our factories would become targets if the enemy discovered. We were supporting UN forces. We had to find a way to contribute without revealing our involvement. She gestured toward the documents on the table. Daehan Manufacturing had the capacity to produce specialized components that were desperately needed by UN forces. Steel parts for vehicle repairs, electronic components for communication equipment, precision tools for maintaining weapon systems. But if we operated openly, North Korean forces would have bombed our facilities within weeks. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison leaned forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by intense interest. So you decided to operate in secret, But why did you personally get involved in field operations? Because the supply chain was too complex to manage from a distance, So Min replied. We were not just manufacturing materials, we were coordinating, with multiple military units, ensuring that critical supplies reached the right places at the right times. This required someone who understood both our production capabilities and military needs. Captain Park studied one of the documents more carefully. It showed detailed shipping manifests with dates and destinations that matched exactly with several major UN operations over the past months. These delivery schedules correspond with significant military activities, he observed. So Min smiled grimly. Exactly. When UN forces were preparing for operations near Incheon, we provided specialized landing craft components. Before the advance towards Seoul, we supplied enhanced communication, equipment. For the winter operations, we manufactured cold weather gear that could not be produced quickly enough through normal military supply channels. She pointed to another document that showed communication records. The intercepted radio messages, that made me look suspicious, were actually coded conversations with our production managers. We had to coordinate manufacturing schedules with military timetables without revealing sensitive information over radio channels that might be monitored. Admiral. Kim Tae-ho began to understand the scope of what he was hearing. So when intelligence officers heard communications mentioning someone with your description, they were actually listening to your own people coordinating supply operations. Precisely, So Min confirmed. The woman they described in those messages was me, but I was not passing information to the enemy. I was receiving updates about our production schedules and delivery arrangements. Major Dubois, who had been silent throughout most of the proceedings, finally spoke up. But why choose to disguise yourself as a refugee? Surely there were other ways to maintain operational security. So Min's expression grew more serious. The refugee camps provided perfect cover for several reasons. First, I could move freely throughout the area without attracting attention from enemy agents who might be watching for corporate executives or military contractors. Second, the camps were located near major supply routes, making it easy to coordinate deliveries. Third, by helping with refugee services, I could justify my presence and my detailed knowledge of logistics operations. She gestured toward her. Torn clothing and worn appearance. Every detail of this disguise was carefully planned. The refugees I helped were real people with real needs, but my assistance also allowed me to maintain cover while conducting business that was crucial to the war effort. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison shook his head in amazement. So your suspicious meetings with truck drivers and dock workers were actually business coordination sessions? Yes, So Min replied. The truck drivers were delivering our materials to military units. The dock workers were helping to ensure that our shipments reached the correct destinations. The detailed information I possessed about supply schedules was necessary for me to coordinate our contributions effectively. Admiral Kim Tae-ho looked at the financial records again. The numbers were staggering. Daihan Manufacturing had contributed materials worth millions of dollars to the UN war effort, all while maintaining complete secrecy about their involvement. Your company has been one of our most important suppliers, he realized, and we never even knew you existed. So Min nodded. That was the intention. Our success depended on remaining invisible to enemy forces while maximizing our contribution to UN operations. The disguise allowed me to personally oversee every aspect of our support without compromising security. She pulled out one more document, this one showing photographs of some of the materials her company had provided: artillery shells, vehicle, parts, communication equipment, medical supplies, and dozens of other critical items that had been used by UN forces throughout the war. The evidence against me was circumstantial because my real activities were classified, So Min explained. Intelligence officers saw suspicious behavior because they did not have access to information about our secret contracts with UN Command. From their perspective, I appeared to be gathering intelligence when I was actually coordinating the delivery of military supplies. The truth was more incredible than anyone in the courtroom had imagined. The woman they had been prepared to execute as a spy was actually one of Korea's most valuable contributors to their own war effort. Admiral Kim Tae-ho set down the final document and looked directly at Lee So-min, his face heavy with the weight of what he had almost done. The courtroom remained silent as he processed the magnitude of his near-catastrophic mistake. Here stood a woman who had risked her life daily to support the war effort, and he had been moments away from sentencing her to death as a traitor. He stood slowly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor in the quiet room. Every person present watched as the Admiral stepped around his desk and approached So-min directly. The formal distance of military protocol seemed inappropriate now that he understood who she really was. "Miss Lee," he began, his voice carrying a tremor that betrayed his emotions, "I owe you an apology that words cannot adequately express. The charges against you are dismissed immediately and completely." So-min bowed slightly, accepting his words. With the same quiet dignity she had maintained throughout the ordeal. Even now, with her true identity revealed, she showed no anger or resentment toward the men who had put her through this terrible experience. Admiral Kim Tae-ho turned to address the entire courtroom, raising his voice so that everyone present could hear clearly. "Let me state for the record that Lee So-min is not only innocent of all charges, but she is one of Korea's greatest heroes in this war. Her contributions to our cause have been extraordinary and invaluable." Lieutenant Colonel Morrison rose from his seat, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Admiral, I must apologize as well. The intelligence reports that led to this situation came from my office. We completely misunderstood what we were observing." "We all made assumptions based on incomplete information," Kim Tae-ho replied. "This serves as a crucial lesson about the dangers of judging people by their appearance or circumstances." He walked back to his position behind the tribunal table and spoke in official tones that would be recorded in the military records. "By the authority vested in me as presiding officer of this tribunal, I hereby commend Lee So-min for her exceptional service to the United Nations forces and the Republic of Korea. Her dedication, courage, and sacrifice have contributed significantly to our war effort." Captain Park approached with the official court records, preparing to document the complete reversal of the proceedings. This case would become part of military history, though few people would ever know the full details due to the classified nature of So-min's operations. So-min finally spoke, her voice carrying both relief and determination. "Thank you, Admiral. I hope that my work can continue now with proper coordination. There is still much that my company can contribute to ending this war successfully." The Allied observers began discussing among themselves the implications of what they had learned. Major Dubois was already taking notes about how to improve intelligence coordination to prevent similar mistakes. Colonel Thompson was considering how other secret contributors might be operating without military knowledge. Admiral Kim Tae-ho made another decision that surprised everyone present. "Miss Lee, I am assigning Captain Park to serve as your official military liaison. From now on, your operations will have full military protection and support. No more disguises, no more operating in shadows." So-min shook her head gently. "Admiral, I appreciate your offer, but the disguise must continue. If my real identity becomes known, it will put my workers and facilities at risk. The secrecy is not just about protecting me, but about protecting everyone involved in our operations." This response impressed Kim Tae-ho even more. Even after being falsely accused and nearly executed, So-min was still thinking about the safety of others and the success of the mission, rather than her own comfort or recognition. "Then we will provide protection in ways that maintain your cover," he decided. "Intelligence officers will be briefed about your operations to prevent future misunderstandings. Supply coordination will be improved to support your activities. You will have what you need to continue your work safely." Word of the tribunal's dramatic conclusion began spreading through military channels within hours. Officers who had heard about the spy trial were amazed to learn that the accused woman was actually a secret hero whose contributions had been helping them throughout the war. The story became a powerful reminder within military ranks about the importance of thorough investigation before making judgments. Training sessions began incorporating discussions about how assumptions and prejudices could lead to terrible mistakes, even in wartime conditions. Sergeant Martinez, the intelligence officer who had first reported So-min's suspicious activities, requested a meeting with his superiors to discuss how surveillance procedures could be improved. He felt personally responsible for the near disaster and wanted to ensure that similar mistakes would not happen again. Over the following weeks, So-min returned to her work with renewed energy. Now that military intelligence was aware of her, operations coordination became much more efficient. Supply deliveries that had previously required careful deception could now be handled with discreet military support. The refugee camps continued to benefit from her presence, though few people there ever learned her true identity. She remained the helpful woman who spoke multiple languages and organized supply distributions. But now she worked with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her real contributions were recognized and valued. Admiral Kim Tae-ho kept the official records of the case in his personal files, reviewing them occasionally as a reminder of how easily justice could go wrong when people made assumptions instead of seeking truth. The woman he had almost condemned became a symbol of hidden strength, an unrecognized service that existed throughout the war effort,